Imagine waking up every morning to find your breakfast waiting on the ground, not delivered by any human hand, but fallen from the sky like dew. For 40 years in the wilderness, this was reality for millions of Israelites. What does this mysterious bread from heaven reveal about divine provision, human nature, and the delicate balance between faith and doubt? When the Israelites found themselves trapped between Pharaoh's advancing army and the Red Sea, they witnessed God's power in the miraculous parting of waters. But surviving one crisis doesn't eliminate the next. 3 days into the wilderness, with their Egyptian provisions exhausted, a new enemy emerged: hunger. The same people who had sung victory songs at the sea began to murmur against Moses, romanticizing their slavery and forgetting their liberation. It was in this moment of desperate need that God introduced a completely new form of sustenance, manna. This wasn't just about food. It was about establishing a relationship of complete dependence and trust. The manna represented God's commitment to His covenant people, demonstrating that He who delivered them from Egypt would also sustain them in the desert. This divine provision came with specific instructions that would test their obedience daily, creating a rhythm of faith that would prepare them for life in the Promised Land. The appearance of manna marked the beginning of a 40-year divine tutorial in trust, where every morning became a lesson in God's faithfulness and every evening a test of human obedience. Each morning, as the dew lifted from the desert floor, there it lay small, round, white like coriander seed, with a taste like honey wafers. The Israelites called it manna, meaning, "What is it?" because they had never seen anything like it. This wasn't ordinary bread that required planting, harvesting, grinding, and baking. It simply appeared with the dawn, covering the ground like frost, requiring only gathering. Children would run out to collect it in containers, while adults marveled at its consistent appearance despite the harsh desert environment. The manna had unique properties that defied natural explanation. It would spoil if kept overnight, except before the Sabbath. It provided complete nutrition for an entire nation, and it adjusted its quantity based on each family's need. Those who gathered much had nothing left over, while those who gathered little had no lack. This wasn't merely supernatural catering. It was a daily demonstration that God's provision operates by different laws than human economics. The regular appearance of manna created a rhythm in the camp gathering in the morning, preparing throughout the day and trusting that tomorrow would bring fresh provision. This miracle became so routine that a generation grew up never knowing any other source of daily bread. The manna came with specific divine regulations that revealed important principles about God's provision. First, it could only be gathered in the morning. Any delay meant it would melt away in the heat of the day, teaching urgency in receiving God's gifts. Second, each person was to gather an omer, about 2 quarts, per day, no more, no less, demonstrating that divine provision is perfectly measured for each individual's need. Third, any attempt to hoard it for the next day, except before the Sabbath, resulted in worms and stench, teaching trust in God's continuing faithfulness rather than reliance on accumulated resources. Fourth, on the 6th day, a double portion would appear and remain fresh through the Sabbath, honoring God's rest and teaching the rhythm of work and worship. These laws weren't arbitrary restrictions, but wisdom principles that addressed fundamental human tendencies toward greed, anxiety, and self-reliance. The manna system prevented both poverty and excessive wealth in the camp. Everyone had exactly what they needed. This divine economy operated on principles of daily dependence, shared equality, and rhythmic rest that would later influence Hebrew social laws. The consistency of these rules over 40 years proved that God as provision isn't random or emotional, but follows reliable patterns that people could trust and build their lives around. The most remarkable aspect of the manna miracle occurred every 7th day, when God demonstrated His lordship over time itself through the Sabbath provision. On Friday, twice the normal amount of manna would fall, and uniquely, this double portion would remain fresh throughout Saturday while the people rested. This weekly miracle within the daily miracle taught profound lessons about work, rest, and trust. The Israelites learned that productivity and provision aren't synonymous. Sometimes the greatest faith is demonstrated by not working, trusting that God has already provided for periods of rest. The Sabbath manna revealed that God's provision transcends human effort, and that observing divinely appointed rest doesn't diminish, but actually demonstrates faith in divine supply. This pattern established the foundation for Sabbath observance that would become central to Hebrew identity and later influence global concepts of weekly rest. Some Israelites initially tried to gather manna on the Sabbath, finding none. Learning that God's timing cannot be manipulated by human schedule or convenience. The Sabbath provision demonstrated that true security comes not from constant activity, but from alignment with divine rhythm. This weekly rhythm of double provision followed by rest became a prophetic picture of spiritual abundance that comes through trust rather than striving. In our contemporary world of food security concerns, supply chain disruptions, and economic uncertainty, the manna story resonates with surprising relevance. Like the Israelites, we often find ourselves caught between the security we've known and the promises that seem uncertain. Our tendency to hoard resources, work excessive hours, and derive identity from productivity mirrors the ancient impulse to gather extra manna or work on the Sabbath. Modern research on universal basic income, food distribution programs, and economic equality often unknowingly echoes the manna principles of measured provision and shared resources. The gig economy has created a generation that, like the Israelites, often doesn't know where tomorrow's provision will come from, requiring daily faith in available opportunities. Environmental concerns about sustainable resources parallel the manna as teaching about taking only what we need, rather than accumulating excess that ultimately spoils. The stress-related illnesses plaguing our always-on culture might find wisdom in the Sabbath manna principle that rest is unearned but provided, and that ceasing work doesn't decrease provision but demonstrates trust. Corporate wellness programs inadvertently acknowledge what the manna taught, that human thriving requires rhythm, limits, and sources of sustenance beyond our own efforts. After 40 years, when the Israelites finally entered the Promised Land and began eating the produce of Canaan, the manna ceased as suddenly as it had begun. This timing reveals something profound about divine provision. It adapts to human need and circumstance rather than becoming a permanent replacement for natural processes. The cessation of manna didn't indicate God's withdrawal, but his confidence that his people were ready for the next phase of relationship with him. Moses commanded that a jar of manna be preserved as a testimony for future generations, recognizing that some experiences transcend explanation and require memorial rather than analysis. The manna remains one of the most documented yet unexplained miracles in human history, challenging our scientific age to acknowledge that some realities operate beyond natural law. Its appearance defied botany, its preservation challenged food science, and its distribution contradicted economics, yet millions of witnesses attested to its reality over 4 decades. The manna teaches us that divine provision often comes in forms we don't recognize, through means we can't control, and according to principles we can't fully grasp. Perhaps the greatest lesson of the manna is that our understanding of provision is limited by our experience, and that true security comes not from comprehending the mechanism, but from trusting the provider. The manna that fell in the wilderness continues to fall today, not as literal bread, but as daily provision that appears through means we often take for granted. Every sunrise, every breath, every unexpected opportunity carries the same divine signature as that ancient desert miracle. The question isn't whether God still provides, but whether we still recognize his provision when it doesn't match our expectations.